There are moments when a perfect work becomes a kind of crime. Not because it's wrong, but because the world isn't ready to hold it. Instead of celebrating it, people fear it. And fear, more often than not, turns into anger. The myth of Arachne is not simply a story about a prideful human being punished by a goddess. It goes much deeper than that. This is a story about what happens when talent becomes too sharp, too honest, too undeniable. On the surface, it looks like a cautionary tale about a mortal who dared to challenge the divine. But if you follow it all the way to the end, a different question starts to form. Was Arachne punished for her arrogance? Or was she punished because she wove the truth too beautifully, too precisely, too clearly for anyone in power to forgive? Arachne was not born into greatness. No royal blood, no palace upbringing. Her father was a dyer of cloth, and her family had no particular standing. But Arachne had something that made all of that irrelevant. She had a gift in her hands unlike anything people had seen. They didn't just come to look at the finished cloth. They came to watch her work. They came to see raw, rough fiber pass through her fingers and become something fine and alive. They came to watch a tangled mess of thread slowly become structure, pattern, meaning. This wasn't just skill. It was like watching an entire world being born from a pair of human hands. Her loom drew crowds. Nymphs from the mountains and rivers were said to leave their streams and hillsides just to watch her weave. And as word spread, so did the whispers. A talent like this couldn't come from a human alone. Surely the goddess of craft and wisdom had blessed her. Surely only someone touched by Athena herself could weave like this. Most people would have taken that as a compliment. Being compared to a goddess sounds like the highest praise. But Arachne heard something entirely different. To her, it felt like theft. Not a celebration of what she had built, but a quiet way of handing the credit to someone else. Every hour she had spent mastering her craft, every failure, every sleepless night, matching color and texture, every bit of instinct she had sharpened through years of practice. All of it was being quietly redirected, away from her hands, and toward the heavens. So she pushed back. Her talent wasn't a gift from the gods. It was hers. She had built it, held it, and pushed it further than anyone thought possible. And the moment someone tried to take that away from her, she felt it as an insult. Eventually, the words came out. Why should she owe anything to some goddess? If Athena was truly that great, let her come down and prove it. This wasn't just a burst of temper. Underneath it was something older and more human. Why does the highest place always belong to the divine? Why is it that no matter how far a human reaches, someone has already decided there's a ceiling? Why, even at the peak of craft and creation, must someone bow their head? Arachne refused to accept that arrangement. And that refusal made her dangerous. Not just because she spoke a goddess's name without reverence, but because she questioned whether the hierarchy itself made any sense. The goddess didn't come down in thunder and lightning. Instead, she arrived as an old woman, bent back, leaning on a staff, moving slowly. This detail matters. Power rarely shows its true face at the start. It usually comes dressed as advice. The old woman warned her. Be satisfied with human praise. Step back before the goddess. Apologize. Take back what you said. Ask for forgiveness. The goddess will be merciful if you do. It sounds gentle enough, but the meaning underneath is clear. Your talent may be extraordinary, but there are boundaries you cannot cross. You may own what you've built, but the right to call yourself the best, that belongs to someone else. Arachne didn't move. She stopped her weaving, looked at the old woman, and said exactly what she thought. Take that advice somewhere else. I know what I'm capable of. If the goddess is so great, let her stop hiding and face me directly. And with that, the disguise fell away. The goddess stood before her. Everyone around them fell back in awe. But Arachne didn't run. Her expression may have shifted for a moment, but she held her ground. Words were finished. Now they would let the work speak. What followed was not just a contest of skill. What each of them chose to weave was a statement, a worldview, a truth they were willing to stand behind. Both moved with breathtaking speed and precision. Hands quick but never rushed. Colors layered but never muddled. Anyone watching would have barely been able to breathe. But the real difference wasn't in the technique. It was in the story each of them chose to tell. The goddess wove order and authority. The gods seated in their rightful places. The structure of the cosmos. Divine power untouchable and absolute. Her cloth was stunning, but it was also a declaration. The world has a hierarchy. The gods sit at the top of it. And that arrangement does not bend. Around the edges, she added warnings. Figures who had dared to compete with the gods, mortals. Who had lifted themselves too high, beings. Who had defied divine power and been transformed or destroyed for it. The cloth was not just beautiful. It was a thread dressed in beauty. Look at who I am. Now look at what happens to those who challenge me. Arachne wove something completely different. No triumph of the gods. No heavenly order. No reverent ceremony. Instead, she chose the scenes the gods would most want hidden. The gods in disguise, tricking mortals. The gods using their power to take what they wanted. The hunger and deception lurking behind divine dignity. One becomes a bull to approach a woman. Another takes the form of a bird, a shower of rain, a tongue of fire, a beast wearing a mask of beauty. The shapes change, but the pattern stays the same. The strong taking from the weak. That is what she wove. And here is why it mattered so much. She wasn't throwing random accusations at the gods. She was selecting specific moments with precision. And then she was rendering them with devastating beauty. The motion of waves, the texture of animal fur, the trembling of a hand, the terror of someone turning to look back, the anxiety of being deceived, the violence folded inside something gorgeous. Her hands weren't just making a beautiful cloth. They were building a lens. Something that brought hidden things into sharp focus. Where the goddess had woven a portrait of authority, Arachne had woven a mirror held up to power. And that is exactly what made it so dangerous. Not because it was wrong. Because it was right. When both cloths were finished, the silence must have been absolute. The goddess's work was flawless. Its grandeur was beyond question. But so was Arachne's. And that is the most uncomfortable truth in the entire story. The goddess could not find a single flaw in Arachne's cloth. The placement of the threads, the flow of color, the sharpness of the figures, the tension in the composition. There was nothing to criticize. Arachne's work wasn't punished for being poor. It was punished for being perfect. The goddess didn't react in anger because the weaving was bad. She reacted because it was extraordinary. Think about what that moment must have felt like. In front of an absolute power. A single human pair of hands had reached nearly the same height. And in terms of what the work said, what it revealed, it may have landed harder. The goddess had woven control. Arachne had woven truth. And people would see both. For power, there is no more dangerous scenario. So the goddess tore the cloth apart. That is the oldest way to silence something you can't argue with. When something is too precise to dismiss, too visible to ignore, when it might make people start asking questions. Power often skips the debate. It goes straight to destruction. Arachne's cloth was shredded, everything woven into it. The gods' hidden moments, the fears of the powerless. The years of labor in her hands, all of it torn open. Then the goddess struck her across the face. This wasn't simply punishment, it was humiliation. A statement that no matter how well you do, you are still the one who gets hit. Arachne broke. In that moment, she was no longer the defiant genius. She was a human being who had reached her limit. Her work had been erased. The truth she had woven had been destroyed. The power she had faced wasn't admitting fault, it was burying it with force. She couldn't carry it. She took a cord and put it around her neck. A lot of stories should end there. The human was defeated, punished, and finally broke under the weight of it. That alone is tragedy enough. But the cruelty of this myth begins right after that. The goddess, seeing Arachne hanging, was said to have felt something like pity. But that pity didn't lead to release. It led to something longer and stranger. The goddess didn't let her die. Instead of cutting the cord, she let Arachne live suspended within it, forever. The transformation began. Her head grew small, her face dissolved, her hands and feet became thin, jointed legs. Her body swelled at the center, and from inside it, thread began to emerge. She was no longer human in form, but she hadn't become something entirely new, either. She was still spinning, still weaving, still hanging, still making. Still doing the one thing she had always done best. Can you think of a more chilling punishment? Not taking the gift away. Turning the gift into the prison. That is the true horror of what Arachne became. When she was changed into a spider. We usually summarize this story quickly. A prideful mortal challenged a goddess and was turned into a spider. And yes, Arachne was fierce, unyielding, unwilling to bend even when the divine stood in front of her. But if you stop there, you miss what's sharpest about this myth. She wasn't just someone who thought too highly of herself. She was someone who believed her talent belonged to her. Someone who refused to let her own achievement be quietly handed to a higher power. And more than anything, she was an artist who looked at the most celebrated figure in her world and chose to weave its shadow onto the cloth. When you look more closely, the goddess and Arachne aren't a simple pairing of good and evil. Both understood the power of weaving. Both knew how to impose order, how to use image to shape the way people see the world. One wove to protect authority. The other wove to expose what authority concealed. One wanted the world to hold together. The other wanted to show where it was cracking. So this wasn't just a skill competition. It was a collision over what beauty is even for. Is beauty meant to preserve order, or to reveal the truth beneath it? Both visions can be brilliant, but they cannot easily share the same space, especially not when one of them holds absolute power. What makes Arachne's story quietly devastating is that she didn't lose because she was worse. She didn't falter or fall short. She became dangerous precisely because there was nothing wrong with what she made. And that is a deeply unsettling idea. Some people are disliked for being wrong. Others are disliked for being too right. A clumsy accusation can be laughed off. A precise one is much harder to live with. A weak piece of work can be ignored. A perfect one stays in the mind. And once it's there, people start to wonder, are the gods truly as glorious as we've been told? Is the order really as clean as it looks? Can power actually face a mirror and not flinch? Arachne's cloth may have been exactly that question, given form and color and life. This is why the story hasn't faded. What happens in it isn't only something from a distant mythological age. Power has always wanted to paint its own face beautifully. Dignity, order, purpose, glory, these are the words it uses to frame itself. But certain artists look underneath the frame. They see the stain below the surface, and they want to show it. The question is what happens at that moment. Will the world applaud them? Or will the world reach for the cloth and start tearing? That said, Arachne is not simply a martyr. She was genuinely difficult. She knew exactly how good she was. And she wasn't interested in softening that knowledge for anyone's comfort. She refused counsel, refused to yield, refused to back down. Even when a goddess stood in front of her. That makes her both magnetic and deeply unsettling. We're often drawn more strongly to the kind of talent that believes in itself, without apology, than to the kind that stays quiet and humble. But that same quality tends to walk people straight into the fire. Arachne stood right on that edge. Her pride was a flaw, but it may have been the same pride that made the work possible. In the first place, the kind of eye that sees with that much precision usually comes with that much self-belief attached. And every time I return to this myth, the ending is what hits hardest. The spider that was Arachne still spins thread, still weaves, still hangs. She cannot stop doing the thing she loved, the thing she used to prove who she was. But it is no longer glory. It is the sentence itself. This is more than a curse. It speaks to something true about how humans relate to their own gifts. We rarely escape what we're best at, and whether that talent becomes freedom or fate, depends entirely on how the world around us decides to receive it. For some, a gift is liberation. For others, it becomes something they can never put down, no matter how heavy it gets. So rather than walking away from this story with a simple lesson about humility, it might be worth sitting with the tension it actually holds. Arachne's tragedy wasn't only the result of going too far. It was what happened when raw human talent collided with divine authority. When art reached toward truth, and when one person's refusal to bow down met a power that could not afford to be questioned. The goddess was protecting an order. Arachne was preserving what she had witnessed. Both were, in their own way, completely serious. But in a world where one of them is absolute, there is no room for both to stand. So something had to break. Arachne may have done the most dangerous thing a human being can do. Not just made something brilliant, but used that brilliance to hold a light up to power. Not just showed off a gift, but let that gift touch something that power needed to keep in the dark. That is why she was punished. And yet, strangely, that is also why she never fully disappeared. If her work had been mediocre, nobody would remember her name. But because it was flawless, because it was so precise that even a goddess couldn't dismiss it, her name outlasted the punishment. Like a spider's web, it looks delicate, almost weightless, until the light hits it. And then you can see every thread, every intersection, every impossible detail. To me, the myth of Arachne is two stories running at the same time. It is a story about the limits of human pride, and it is also a story about a world that could not handle what human art was capable of. Mortals are weaker than gods, and they do get broken. But there is something strange and stubborn in human beings. Even when we look directly at a power greater than ourselves, we still find a way to remember what we saw, and to give it form. We press what can't be spoken into cloth, into paint, into story. That impulse is always risky, because it doesn't just make something beautiful, it makes people look at what they've been avoiding. Arachne pushed that impulse all the way to the edge. She was destroyed for it. But she also became something that showed us the sharpest edge of what human art can be. And maybe that is the reason this myth still holds us. Because somewhere, we all recognize it. We know that in this world, the most accurate thing you can say is sometimes the most dangerous thing. And we know that the most beautiful work is sometimes the one that becomes impossible to bear.